Today we start our study of the book of Jonah. You're watching At the Pastor's Desk. So the book of Jonah is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. It's really fun to read. It's short. It takes up just a couple pages in your Bible. And there's so much packed into it, though, even though it is short, that it's definitely worth looking at, definitely worth a study. And there are three things that I would say are key points in this book that we should have in mind as we read. The first one is looking at how God works in spite of Jonah. Many of you know the story of Jonah, so it's not going to be a whole lot of new information from a narrative perspective. But seeing how God works faith in people even when Jonah doesn't want that to happen or isn't even realized that he's preaching. But God works anyway. And so seeing how God is at work even when we don't really do that good of a job, it's a comfort, especially to us pastors. The second thing is seeing God save the Gentiles, the unbelievers, those who are not the chosen people. This, of course, is very important for the modern day church, as most of us are not Jews by blood. And so this is very important for us, that God, even though he had his chosen people of Israel, still throughout the Old Testament, before Jesus comes down to earth, God is saving the Gentiles. He is giving them salvation. And this shows that salvation is for everyone. And then the third point, which is brought up in the New Testament, is the sign of Jonah. Of course, we see Jonah in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And this is brought up in the New Testament by Jesus himself, saying that Jonah was a foreshadowing of what Jesus would go through, that Jesus would be in the grave for 3 days, in the belly of the earth for 3 days. And so that foreshadowing of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. So with those things said, let's go ahead and dive into chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So already, just a few verses in, we get the main conflict in this book. God has spoken to Jonah, Jonah being God's prophet in that time. He tells Jonah to get up and go to Nineveh and share the gospel with them because they have sinned against God. Their sin has come up before him. And Jonah does not want to do this. In fact, it's in the Veggie Tales, which my daughter loves to watch. It really shows how Jonah would go anywhere other than Nineveh. He knows that Nineveh is awful. They have a horrible reputation. And he would go anywhere in Israel, but not Nineveh. But God tells him to anyway. Again, this shows God's great mercy. And Jonah does not want to bring that to the people. He does not want to go to Nineveh. So he hops on a ship and goes as far the other way as he can. He goes all the way to Tarshish. And so he buys this ticket onto this boat and sails away. And why does it say? The text says to flee from the presence of the Lord. He wants to get away from God because he knows how God is. He knows God's character. And he does not want Nineveh to be saved. Then we go on to verse 4. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish. So here the storm comes. God sends this storm. This is a divinely sent storm, not a natural phenomenon. Comes against this ship. And the sailors, they realize this. The sailors in this day, you didn't really have atheists in this day. Everybody believed in something. These sailors, they started shouting out to their gods, trying to get their attention that they would save their lives. But notice that they're also tossing over their cargo to try and lighten the ship so that it's less likely to sink. So not only are they praying to their gods, but just in case the gods don't act, we're getting this cargo out of the boat. And so they're freaking out about this. But where's Jonah? Jonah has fallen asleep inside the ship. He doesn't know what's going on. And so then the captain comes in. Notice what he says. His first word is arise. It's the exact same word that God spoke to him at the beginning, telling him to arise and go to Nineveh. So already we see that in both with the storm and with the captain coming before Jonah, Jonah has failed to flee from God's presence, and God continues to call to Jonah to arise and do what he has commanded him to do. And notice the mindset of the sailors. He says, perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may perish. You see, with these other pagan gods, they weren't like the God of Scripture. They weren't like Yahweh, where he is constantly watching over his people and taking care of them. These other gods, they're busy doing their own thing, and occasionally they will interact with humanity. And so these sailors are trying to get the attention of the gods to say, hey, we're down here, we're dying, please save us. It's so opposite of what our God is like. Our God is constantly watching over us. He knows everything about us. And so we don't need to try and get his attention. He is constantly watching over us, and it shows the great love of the true God, Yahweh. And now that the storm has come, we see what happens next. And they said to one another, come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? And where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? So the sailors are grilling Jonah. They cast these lots that fate is going to identify whose problem this is. The gods are going to show them. And so the lot falls on Jonah, which of course is not a coincidence. This is divine action again. God is involved here. And so they start asking questions. Who are you? What do you do? What have you done? Who are your people? Any kind of clues that we can get as to why this storm is happening. And then we get Jonah's response. And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. And then we get Jonah's answer. So Jonah here is giving them their answers. He's saying that I'm a Hebrew, those are my people, that's who I am, and I fear the Lord, and he is the God of all things, the God who created the sea and the land. And this strikes fear into the sailors. Their gods, are usually only gods of one particular element. Think of the Greek gods. You have Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Zeus, the god of the sky, of lightning. And you have all of these elements that each have their own god. Yet Jonah here says, I worship the God who created all of these things. And so without even realize it, he is preaching to these sailors. He is saying, yeah, those gods that you think you worship, I worship the God who created everything, who is above all things, all of these elements. You think the sea itself is a god. My God created that. And so it causes these sailors to fear, like, whoa, we are dealing with something that is far beyond anything we've ever even conceived of. This God that's created all things. And so the sailors panic. And Jonah has told them that he's fleeing from God, which the sailors probably don't understand. Why would you flee from someone who is so great and so mighty? But this is what happens to sinners. We naturally flee from God, especially when he wants us to do things that are contrary to what we want. So then, getting this answer, they ask the next question. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. It's a natural question. What can we do to appease your God to save our lives? We don't want to die. And here's what Jonah says. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." So Jonah gives the answer, to toss him into the sea, which would be a sure death sentence. There would be no one to rescue him, no one to save him from drowning in the middle of this sea. And so what Jonah is suggesting here is, guys, you need to sacrifice me. You need to give me over to death so that you may live. And again, this points forward to what Jesus would do. He is the great sacrifice that would pay for all sins and save the lives of all humanity, all those who believe. But then we see that the sailors aren't on board with this right away. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. So God here is not letting them get out of this on their own. The men, they don't want to kill Jonah, so they're trying their hardest by their own might to go against the will of God. And God says, no, it's not going to happen. And so they're unable to accomplish this. So, not being able to do this, they say this. Therefore they called out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So they cry out to God, "Please don't let this man's blood be upon us." They know that Jonah's going to die. There's no one to save him. They are sending him to his death. And so they plead with Jonah's God, not their God, but Jonah's God, showing their faith, that Jonah's blood would not be on them. And so they cast him into the sea, and instantly, boom, the sea calms. And so they see this, and they believe in God, and they offer sacrifices, and they make vows. They show their faith, which God gave to them. They show that faith by believing and by saying these vows to God that they would follow him. And then what happens to Jonah? Our text continues and says, "And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." So God is not done with Jonah. Even though Jonah has offered to be sacrificed for these men, and it certainly seemed like certain death, God saves him. He sends this fish to swallow up Jonah, not condemning him, but saving him. And it is this fish that saves him, that brings salvation, saves him from drowning. And so we'll see in chapter 2 Jonah's response to this, that he actually sings a song of praise and thanks to God for his great mercy towards him. So we'll pick up with chapter 2 tomorrow of Jonah. Again, there's only 4 chapters in Jonah, so it's a pretty short book. If you have any suggestions for what we should study next, whether it's a book of the Bible or a topic to be addressed or questions that you have that you want answered, go ahead and leave those in the comments. Let me know what they are, and we can work that into future videos. I'm happy to do this for you. These videos are for you. This is not my show. I want these to be helpful for you. And so if there's things you want to know, leave those questions or comments in the comment section, and I'll see if I can make some videos about those once we get through with Jonah. So thanks for watching. Keep on tuning in for more videos. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification button to be notified whenever new videos come up. Take care. God bless.